Burkman and I spent a lot of time engaged in deep existential discussion. I wanted you to have a little bit of insight into one of those conversations. This particular one was recorded the day after the riots, the insurrection on the Capitol. All right, Noel, so here's what I want to start with you. You and I have been talking over the past number of weeks about your view about democracy, and that democracy might not be able to survive with a big number of people. You can phrase it better. And you and I are recording this the day after what happened at the Capitol.
Right.
So start me there, taking a step back and talking about yesterday or in the context of yesterday. Talk to me about your views on democracy.
Well, I mean, the conversations we've had prior to yesterday, and keeping in mind that I'm not a scholar, I'm just a guy. But my hypothesis or my personal sense is that democracy has a scaling problem, and there's probably bounds and levers that have to do with size and diversity, and special interests and so on and so forth, that a democracy at some point will reach an upper bounds and not scale any farther and hit a wall that we're not prepared to deal with.
And what does that wall look like?
Well, I think some of it looks like some of the stuff that we're possibly experiencing. I think there's some of the wall, looks like economic stability, economic leadership, military leadership, trade. I mean, I think it affects all of those areas, human rights, across the board.
Yeah. So, everybody has been saying, not everybody, lots of people have been saying over the past 24 hours, you could see this coming. But I think that the reasons that they say it and the reasons you would say it are different. Right. And the reasons a lot of people here are saying you could see this coming is because of the incitement that the president has been doing, because of the riling up, because of the false news about the elections and what have you. But from my perception of what you would say, we're getting to the point where I can project what you would say is that, or as an extension of the democracy thing is that this was an inevitability given the limits of democracy. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, so what I heard on every news station yesterday was we saw it coming in terms of within the last few months we've seen conversation, we've seen people speaking about how yesterday was going to unfold. What I think we saw coming was somebody like Donald Trump and somebody divisive and somebody able to leverage ideas that don't necessarily have weight behind them in a way that they can take some control, and what that leads to is inevitable. So see it coming, I think goes farther back. And I do stick by the adage of we'll see, right? Because okay, we are where we are today. Is that a better place than we were yesterday or last week? We'll see. I think it feels good right now, but
Which part feels good?
Well, I think there's a sense of yesterday was an upsetting day, and even it was upsetting enough where Republicans, and I go both ways, so I'm making no comment about where I land politically. However, there was a divisiveness that seemed to dissolve a little bit last night, and that seemed good, right? That seemed like a positive step after an unsettling day, but we'll see.
So you mean when Lindsey Graham finally spoke up and said something?
Lindsey Graham, who's the other guy? Oh, I can't think of
Which one? Which one?
Yeah. So they said something, and Lindsey Graham's speech was inspiring, and Mitt Romney's speech. Mitt Romney had been fairly vocal for the last, I don't know, half a year, 2 years. I don't know what the numbers. And that's great. However, what it took to precipitate that was extreme. And there's always the deals and the discourse that goes on behind the scenes to make that. It didn't just happen, right? You didn't just have a no offense, come to Jesus moment, uh, and
Moses, come to Moses, but that's
come to
okay.
Moses and make a decision that have a change of heart, right? I'm sure that came with other commitments and deals and factors that we don't see, and that's just how that stuff works.
Yeah. One of the many things that I love about our time together, and I've told you this, is that I happen to think that I haven't said it this way to you. You're one of the more Jewish thinkers that I come into contact with. I knew you were going to laugh at that. But what does that mean to you when I say that before I tell you what I mean?
Well, I don't think you mean it as a Jew, right? I think you mean it as a dynamic or framework, and how I look at potential possibly look at information and analyze it, discuss it, and kind of throw my opinions out there and how we talk about it and dissect it and go back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, you're an incredible what ifer, and not what if in terms of hypothesis that's not possible, but always not accepting the status quo, not and always looking at it from a really different angle. Where does that come from for you?
Uh, I not to compare myself to anybody else, I would just say that my path to where I am compared to people, friends, and others that I talk to is maybe a little out of the ordinary, right? So I've been in positions and had to be in places where if I had looked at things just straight up the middle and taken it for what it's worth, I might be in a different place.
What do you mean by that?
Well, uh, I don't necessarily want to get into all of that. However, let's just take school. I have a learning disability, right? That's an easy one, and lots of people have that, and will others that have it, I think, will identify with this. But in order to get by, especially when it goes undiagnosed for a period of time, you have to adapt, and you might not even know you're adapting, right? But you certainly can't take the information that a lot of people around you are taking in and process it the same way, and expecting the same outcome. And so in order to get by in school and life and out in the world, I had to kind of look at things out of necessity from a different angle. um I think that's one place that it stems from.
Yeah. And so that has caused you to look at it from different ways and also to look for more diverse information
Well,
instead
you
of
look
just
at
one source.
you look for input and data and meaning from other aspects. Like when you're talking with somebody, just as an example, I feel like, um, I have an auditory processing uh, disability or problem. I don't know if it's disability, but so when I'm talking to somebody, I think I pay much more attention to less to the words and more to tone and inflections in tone. Actually, to a fault. I think that's actually something I had to dial back because it can really affect you. Facial expressions, gestures. Really learning to pick up on those things as a data input for myself to really better understand what's being said.
Yeah. So I want to go back to something you said in passing there, in which you said when I made my comment about you're one of the more Jewish people I know, you said maybe not as a Jew. Why did you react that way?
Well, I mean, listen, this is between you and me. This is no surprise. Between you and my wife, this is no surprise. As far as a traditional Jew goes, um, I don't follow that mold. I don't consider myself particularly Jewish in the sense of feeling the need to follow tradition and ritual um, and those aspects of it. So, my connection with the community, with the Jewish community, and we've had many conversations about this, probably comes more from uh, uh, how the rest of the world might identify me and what I need to do about that versus I'm a believer.
Do you think that Judaism it has run its course?
Depends what you mean. I mean, I think most religions in what they've done, where they came from and why they were there have run their course, right? Um, and so I wonder, and you and I've talked about this, is what purpose does it really play in anybody's life on a day-to-day basis? I think I've said in my head, the kind of the scenario we played through, if a Jew were to come back from, say, circa zero, right, and look at what we were doing and the rituals we were partaking in, but also was aware of what was going on around us, I think they may say, why are you doing this? Right? You know so much more. Some of the questions some of the rituals we're trying to answer the questions that you can, a lot of the questions you can answer now. Of course, you have the conversation we also always have, which, well, where does it go back to? Right? There is
Let's
that.
just start numbering the conversations so we can just say 4,
Yeah.
7. I can just go. We'll make the conversations much shorter, but go on, keep going.
And so run its course. I think from a functional practicality perspective, worship perspective, to me, it's run its course. I understand the community connection. I understand the historical connection. I am a big fan of Israel but I see it as an outpost, right? when you have to drop back and retreat, that's in my head, that's, I don't know if that's unusual or common, but that's the drop back and punt position.
Okay, but a community requires something that makes it a community, doesn't it?
I don't know what you mean by that.
I mean, don't you need some? I mean, so you said Judaism as a community still has value, even if it's something for you to drop back to. But what does that look like without the ritual, or without the worship, or without the symbols, or without the whatever else you might reject?
Right.
There's no there, is there?
Well, yeah, I mean, our community is because the where we live, if you just take it geographically, right? We live in a community of people who are very much alike, right? And there's connection there between what we do for work and the things that interest us, and reading and art and all those things. That's a very big connection. It's the center of a lot of conversation. I mean, listen, I mean, not to be cliche, I have a lot of non-Jewish friends, right? We have a lot in common. We have a community. Um, I've been, when you go other places with very different people, they have their community that's not necessarily centered around a religion, but it's centered around beliefs and ideas about how they're navigating their day, what's important to them, financial, whatever their common ground is what community can be built on.
Yeah, but for you, we were talking about Judaism as a community to fall back on. What is the Jewish community to fall back on if there's none of that stuff?
It's a place, and people, I mean, it's by default, it's less about how you identify yourself and how the rest of the world categorizes you, and having to be amongst other people in that same category it may be nice for some, but for me, it's not nice, but it's really about having some protection, and being in a safe place.
Hmm. So I was thinking on my way to when I was walking Louise this morning and thinking about you and what we were going to talk about. Uh, if it was not religion, it's politics. If it's not politics, it's something else. Right? I mean, do you still think that humans, that we privileged humans, or maybe any humans,
Mhm.
still have a group mentality or a need for groupings like this and
Yeah, I
as
think that's
identity?
evolutionary, right? That's survival. It's and what you find, what you what you lay over that to help you adhere to that community is somewhat arbitrary from my perspective. I think the desire is an evolutionary construct.
So is your desire as that evolutionary construct, is that desire for you or is it for your grandkids?
Well, I think it's one and the same. I mean, preserve, I put my son before me, because I love him, because all those things. But I think that also comes from, not to be too nihilistic, but I think that also comes up from a place of survival, right? And the intrinsic desire um, to keep the species going.
So if your grandkids, should you want them and should your son want them and should you be lucky enough to have them, I just wanted to be Jewish there. If they decided to identify for their group not in Judaism, that wouldn't bother you. It's the idea. I'm
Yeah,
going at this idea of the need for group. I'm not trying to aha you or whatever. I'm just
no,
trying to get a sense of how you identify that.
I mean, listen, you know this. My son wasn't bar mitzvahed, right? And not because I didn't want him to be bar mitzvahed, but because of the experience I was seeing him have, and where how I valued that in terms of his interaction with it. It had to be important to him, And it wasn't just not important to him. It was, he gave pretty good arguments for a 13-year-old as to why he didn't do it. And frankly, it wasn't a pleasant experience to me. So that was probably an overlay. But, if I am less concerned about what he picks as meaningful and important to him versus how fulfilled and happy and what kind of a contributor he is back to the community and however farther out from the community he chooses to go.
So you're staying with him. I was going to the hypothetical, and you were going to the actual. Because we see this in millennials and thereafter, or at least we older folks perceive it to be that there's been a complete breakdown in community. That community has been identified in a much more fluid, if not even Talmudic kind of way, right, with tentacles everywhere, which makes it seem like not a real community. And so I wonder if even the idea of the need for groups, putting aside yesterday and that group mentality, is also evolving and changing in humans once we reach a level of personal comfort as a
Well,
society.
let me ask you that question, the one you just asked me, right?
Uh,
What's your answer to that question? Should your grandkids and your great grandkids choose to go in different directions or reprioritize what's important to them?
I think it's a real, I have evolved on that. I used to care a lot more because for me, caring about it was feeling control over it. Control over the future, but also control over my relationship to the past and my obligations to it. But on the other level is to have a child who is secure enough in, for me, himself, to go and be him, I think is valuable, and to succeed for himself, whatever that might be, and to self actualize, whatever that might mean. Those are a lot of words. But what if my son were to jump in? When I was thinking about leaving Judaism for your grandkids, I wasn't thinking of going to Christianity or Islam or what have you. I was thinking of QAnon. What if your grandchild were to jump into QAnon? What if my kid were to feel secure enough in his ideas that that's where that resonates with him, or my grandkids? I think I would go bananas.
But you've said to me, well, I mean, what is good, what is bad, why is
I
something
knew
right?
we
Why,
keep coming back to that every freaking time we talk. Go
so you're making a qualitative judgment about those things, right?
about
And
QAnon, you mean?
well, even that, I mean, you're saying it's bad, but you've often said to me, what is bad, what is good? They're just thing constructs that don't mean anything.
Yeah.
I think that's an actual quote.
Close. Go ahead. They're relative to each other, which means they're
So,
relative to nothing.
so just because, just because you would see that as radical and probably not based in fact and upsetting, right? Does that mean you attempt to talk them out of it because it's a position you don't
Oh,
agree
I
with?
didn't say I would attempt to talk them out of it. I said I'd be really disappointed. I
Well,
didn't say I would.
disappointment is inevitable.
Jewish guilt is inevitable.
Right.
No, so what I want to say is my reaction here to what is good and what is bad. Yes, it is relative. And if you haven't said this to me, others have in different capacities. And that is very simply, Stacey Robinson said this to me last week. Just to live your life and, do no harm. And I have to preface that by saying I understand that my very existence as me does harm to others.
Well, it does harm and non-harm, right? I mean, but this is where you and I always get caught up. Do no harm. Why?
Yeah, well, that to me, because it just doesn't feel right to do harm. I mean, look, I believe in filling my space as much as possible and being content with that. And I'm not always content with it. And we live in a society where it's okay to try to increase that footprint at whatever cost.
Yeah, I definitely, I definitely believe our impact on each other is how we treat each other, and that ripples out, right? How I treat my son, how I treat you, how I treat my friends, impacts them. How they treat me impacts me, and hopefully, that propagates. But the do no harm discussion, which makes sense to me, and we've talked about why we feel that way, right? We talk a lot about like the evolutionary biology. Does it press the dopamine button for us? And is that why we choose to do no harm, right? Because if everybody was doing each other harm, there will be some, but if everybody was doing harm, we wouldn't get very far. right?
Yeah, well, but doesn't it feel sometimes like we're always doing each other harm? And look, just because I can't see
Right.
that my owning this has done irreparable harm to so many different people in so many different environments and places and time, how do we mitigate? How do we're always doing people harm, and there's obvious examples of it yesterday, and there are less obvious but obvious to some of us as opposed to others when other peoples are oppressed, and then there's the universality of it. My very
Well,
existence in America harms others.
it harms others. It help. I mean, it's a balance, right? It's not net harm necessarily, right? The net at the end could be net good, right? Hard to quantify, hard to measure. But the phone, doing no harm, or how you'd be paralyzed. How do you, how do you yesterday? So did people do harm? Yeah, but is there potential that it changed the course of things in a different way? We'll see. Possibly.
Yeah, yeah, that's a hard one for me. Not so much about yesterday, but about the fact that you didn't say this, but I'm gonna push it. That to one extent, harm is a necessary agent for change.
Well, harm just is. It's not, I mean, it's it's unavoidable, right? Because there's one, no two people will see a situation exactly the same way, right? That's just how the brain
Well,
works.
it's the way you see it and the right way, right?
Right,
Which is
right,
my way.
right, right, right. So harm. I mean, it is easy to do harm, or at least have somebody feel harmed, right? And that's that just is. There's not much, you don't do it with intent. If in doing harm with intent is a different thing. The iPhone, buying an iPhone and taking that all the way back to the slave labor that's digging cobalt out of the ground is is a problem. Um, how do you solve that problem? What if you don't make it? There's also a lot of people and jobs, and it's complicated, it's complex, and there's no right now, at least I don't. I mean, but nobody asked me. I don't have a good answer, and thank God nobody asked me, because I wouldn't know how to answer it.
Well, I think it comes back to the idea of community, though. If I'm going to suppose for a moment, and I know this is a wrong supposition, but let me have it,
Go for it.
that if we're about do no harm to me, simply that, not just do no harm globally, do no harm to me, then communities exist as a way to maximize the number of people who can actualize that collectively, and therefore make it easier for oneself. So that the need for community begins from that very basic kind of what's in it for me, even if I can't get everything that I want in that community, because by its nature, it has to contain its members.
I'm keep going. I'm not sure I'm getting.
So in other words, when we say we need community, perhaps one of the reasons we need community is because of the need for us to do no harm, that we want no harm done to us. And the best way to have no harm done to us is to make sure we're in a group of people that think like we do, that behave like we do, that also have our collective self-interest is interlocked.
Yeah, but in order to maintain that, there's communities do harm beyond their community to maintain that. How many synagogues are formed because of a fracture in,
Yours,
right,
Hakafa.
right, and so harm, and people would claim harm probably in that process, and disagreement. So communities splinter, they change, they're amoebic. They, some break down, some regroup, and arguably there's harm. I mean, harm is a weird word, uh because I don't know, it might be too aggressive, but there's certainly hurt feelings, or people upset, or even some damage being done in different ways, but it's, folk, whatever side you're on, I think a lot of, taking out psychopaths and narcissists, I think most people act in a way that they feel is beneficial, but not always understanding the ecosystem, and how that works. Getting in my car every day and putting carbon into the air. I kind of get the ecosystem, but I still do it.
So it gets back to the original question I asked you, and this is about how big is too big for democracy. I think I told you once that my brother-in-law's dear friend lives on a commune in, I think, West Virginia. There's commune, like a kibbutz.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he went and spent a good amount of time with them and realized how wonderful it was to live in a socialistic kibbutz type of space with 50 people that are like you or have the same ideals. And then what he and I talked about it, and he came out with it that says, however, socialism can only work in a small group, right? Is that for any community to be successful, it can't be too large. So for the ideal of universalism, from the perspective of when you're comfortable in your particularism and you say, why can't everybody have this? What happens when it expands? Why can't it expand?
I mean, there's many people way smarter than I have thought about this, and
Yeah, but you're pretty smart. So what's your why is it that there's a limit to that? Why a limit to democracy, a limit to socialism, a limit to before there's a breakdown and there has to be a new congregation?
so I'll just simplify it because I think simply so why I think there's too many. There's even within our small community, there's people with different perspectives, different needs, different priorities, and different values, right? So the more people you put into the mix, the more diverse those become.
Yeah.
And that and some they become in some cases they become more extreme or more, if there's a center, if you start at a center point, folks over time tend to move away from that center point in different ways and different groups for different reasons. And so when you get more people, when you increase the variables, the number of variables, the number of people in the mix and the number of groups in the mix, and you build a system that creates so many special interest in different perspectives on the. I mean, looks half our country voted one way, half voted the other way. That's a pretty big split. I mean, and that's a problem. I mean, it's good that so many people voted and all that stuff. However, the dichotomy is a problem, right?
Well, it's
And
only a problem if you don't feel valued in the community, right? If to the extent that you divert, that every person feels like their voice can be heard or that they find value in it because they are valued, I think it doesn't matter. You and I can disagree as much as you want to be wrong. That's
right.
fine. Um,
Well, I think it matters how far from the center you both are of where you started, right? So the dichotomy of this election, or the dichotomy, or the of the perspectives, are very different in this case. They're not close, so they're not incrementally off. I think they're significantly off, right? And I think the distance and difference makes a difference.
well, look, I think I'm farther from the center than you are. You think that's fair?
Center of what?
Of political, religion, worldview, no, general worldview. I think I am farther. I am much more liberal bent, drink the Kool-Aid
Right.
than than
Well,
than you are.
that may be the center. I mean, that may be the center. I don't know. I mean, if so, I think I'm more. I- I'm liberal on some issues, but those are weird terms too, liberal and conservative, and because I don't think they're right. Right. I think you can have an economic view that's not in conflict with a social and political view that are now categorized as conservative and liberal, and that doesn't seem right to me, because I think you can have broad views. You want good for people, you want certain economic benefits, so that's a hard one.
So again, but the reason I say that is that you and I are, I mean, we're not that far apart. There are others I'm farther apart from than you and me, you and I. And we still maintain, from my perspective, a really trusting relationship. I'm not speaking for you. That's why I said from my perspective. You don't have to chime in there. So I think you can be divergent from the center as long as you still feel valued. The question then becomes is what happens when you no longer feel valued, or for people who've been forced into our society to have never felt value.
Right. Well, I think that one is the ideas and value are two different things in terms of how you connect with somebody. I was trying to stay off Facebook last night, but this is the conversation that's been going on, is I'm going to defriend or unfollow or somebody who has an opinion that I don't agree with. That's very dangerous to me, right? That shuts down conversation. I have many friends who think very differently than I do, and that's fine. I mean, and and I get why they do, and some of it I don't agree on, and we've had good conversation, but I would never walk away from somebody unless they were intentionally trying to be hurtful or harmful or um, abusive, but to 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 connect the concept of ideas and then value and respect of somebody, I think is, there's extremes, obviously, right? Where ideas become actionable in dangerous ways. Um, but towards the center of the curve, I think is I don't connect the two.
Okay, I think that the midst, at least in America, that center of the curve was always predicated on a white narrative, and white people could argue relatively easily until the Civil War, and then, well, and then after, until black voices started to become necessary to be heard.
Mhm.
And I think you could disagree with this. More than anything else, the rights of empowering black voices to be heard in our society um, is a necessary step for America to become America. That's what the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments were about, and is a lot at the root of the problem and the tensions right now of people defriending each other.
Yeah, and this gets back to scale, my issue of scale, right? Yeah, I agree. Does that is that idealistic or practical? And I think it's a dynamic that's a limitation of democracy and its ability to scale.
What the difference?
Yeah,
Such divergent difference. I mean, allowing a people that has been here all along but disenfranchised to actually be heard, and what that means for what people perceive they have to give up.
right. This right, and yeah, and that's the type of thinking. I mean, so you don't. That's a big boat to turn, right? And it's going to turn slowly. The question is, do we have patience to watch the boat turn? And if not, if we don't have the patience to do that, and I'm on, I'm not on that side of it, so it's easier for me to say. But if we don't have the patience to do that, then what?
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Because
look, yeah, I mean,
it's going to happen quicker and quicker, but it's not going to happen quickly.
well, look, to have for 8 years to have the boat go this way, then in the next 8 years, well, I say this way, and then the next 8 years the boat to go this way, and then it to go this way, you start to get seasick.
Well, I think the boat's actually been going pretty straight with just subtle, subtle course corrections, right? So I don't see it. I don't. It's been slowly turning. Um, I don't see the seasick part. I just see it takes a long, long time.
So what you just said to me was very MLK-ish. What you just said to me is that the arc of history bends towards justice. That's what I just heard you say.
Oh, well,
If you perceive
we're
and
talking
if you
about
perceive,
one. I mean, we're talking about one scenario here, right?
yeah.
The problem is you have a lot of boats out there, and sometimes they bump into each other. And that's if there was one issue, if we're just looking at trying to make one issue different, better, whatever the outcome is. If we're just trying to change one thing, that's one thing. We're trying to change. Lots of things are trying to change, and not everybody's trying to change it the same way. And that's what concerns me. And that's where I start to think like, does this scale? Are there too many boats in the water, and are there too many people in the boats to really make a difference and change it?
All right, I'm going to do a shift now because when you and I started talking years ago,
Mhm.
um, we were started talking about a spiritual journey and what that meant. Um, what is spirit to you or spirituality?
Well, it's I mean, spirituality, again, one of those weird terms that's misused and overused. And I mean, connection, right, is for me, it's connection to something more, but something that's not necessarily conscious or sentient, right? Just something bigger and connected to other people. I don't know what that is, but I don't, when I sit in a synagogue and I read the words, like, that's not spiritual to me. That's not, those are words that somebody's already written down and saying you should say, and say it in this order and at this time and stand down. So that's not spiritual to me. That's not where I get fulfillment. I get fulfillment, that kind of fulfillment, when I have conversations like this, when I meditate, when I think, when I have time to myself to kind of think bigger. Those are moments. Listen to music, or stand at the ocean. Those are moments of connection and spirituality to me that I don't get anywhere else.
So you think it's connection to a greater consciousness.
Something. I mean, the way I've always described it is like, if I look at my table and the table represents everything there is to know, like there's one little pinpoint. We try and put everything in the context of that little pinpoint, and think we have a lot of answers. And I just don't see it that way. And I guess knowing coming knowing that I don't know, but I believe there's more. That there's where my leap of faith is, in believing that there's more. Um, is kind of my entry point for spirituality.
So now I'm getting frustrated, not at you, but just a general kind of with this, not even with this conversation, but I feel the frustration coming up that we're talking about that there are limits to democracy, right? There are limits to movements. They're scalable, or they're not scalable. And here we're talking about, on the same conversation when I mentioned to you about spirits, that we are all connected then to a greater consciousness, which is a universal. So that's not scalable. I mean, so if each of us, there's, I'm not there yet. That's why I'm teasing this out with you. Why is meta consciousness scalable to the entire
I
existence?
don't know that it is.
But
And,
okay, so speak to that.
and you're saying consciousness. I don't know that it's a consciousness, right? Um, that's implying that there's intelligence, or there's purpose. It could have just been
Not meant that, because I don't believe in purpose or that. But go ahead.
so I don't know that it's a consciousness. I mean, listen, the little blue dot picture, right, often pops into my head, in this little speck, and the words that Carl Sagan spoke about, everything, everything that's happened, everybody who's ever been killed, everybody is on that little blue dot, and there's all of this other stuff going on around us. And so trying to contextualize all this other stuff on this, I don't know if that makes sense, on this little blue dot, to me just seems unrealistic. So
So what
I
are you
don't
connecting to? What are you connecting to then
I
when you have that?
a sense of something bigger. I couldn't tell you what that is. um I I don't think I couldn't. And I would, my perspective would be, nobody could. People could try, and they do, and they try and box it into a context, a framework and dogma and all those things. But that's just a way, in my opinion, for people to feel, communities, groups to feel connect, and a way to precipitate out a connection, and articulate a connection that they
So
can.
it's so that's more what you're saying then, is that's more like what Harari said in Sapien at the beginning, right? Is that we humans create these myths, these falsehoods that we can all then live by. And so that the sense that there is something greater than us is one of those convenient myths that we could buy into. And if everyone can buy into it, then there's a universality to that, then maybe we can all survive. I added that at the end.
The other side of that coin is if I go the other way, and say there's nothing, that's a personal, that's scary to me, right? So part of that is kind of
What's so
protecting.
scary? What's so scary about that?
I don't know. For me, the idea of nothingness, and is unsettling. Like, I couldn't tell you why, but in my psyche, that idea is unsettling. So I stay away from it.
Hmm. Again, then, I mean, so if all of us could connect to the more than,
Hmm.
why can't that be? And this sounds very Pollyanna. Why can't we all just get along? I don't mean it that way, but I do almost. That's my frustration. This is
But
my
that
frustration, is that if in fact we're saying that people can't get along in bigger groups, that people can't organize in bigger groups, that the experiments of governance, of community has its upper limits. And we're also saying now at the same time, we're all interconnected by this greater ism. Why, where's the, talk to me. Rabbi, talk to me.
Listen, I'm telling you what works for me,
I know
right? I'm
but
not
that's
telling
why
you
we're
I'm
having this
right.
conversation with everybody. I want people to hear that. I mean, because
So
go
so
speak to it.
why can't why can't we all get along? for a lot of different reasons. I mean, listen, we're again, we're in a community that has economic privilege, and some people outside of the community may look at that in a negative way, and that's why that may be why at the most primitive level why we can't get along with others outside of the community. Um,
Yet, if we were to share it, maybe they could. We could.
but sharing, but that sharing is a tough. I mean, what does that mean to share? I mean, you and I had the conversation about diversification and Glencoe. And what makes you think other people want to come and live in Glencoe, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I don't know what sharing. Lots of people I know are philanthropic and give a lot of their time, and um, but what do you share? I mean, I'm not sure what sharing means.
Well, what I would say to that is, so here we're at Page of Talmud again. So sharing, as you know, that I feel would be you being in a community, in a society that understands that allowing the privileged few to have the majority of assets is detrimental to the well-being of the greater society. So you put in guardrails so that you do not allow the disparity gap to be so great, so that there are people that don't have opportunity
I
and
can
real
make
opportunity.
I mean, I could say that without those people, a lot of other people don't have jobs.
Well, that's Reagan's trickle down
But
idea.
but
That hasn't worked. But anyhow, so
well,
I don't want to go there. I want to
it
talk about
really hasn't
why we
worked.
can't, why in the universal sense we can't all, I don't believe we can. I mean, it sounds so icky to me to say, why can't we all just get along? I don't know why that sounds so icky to me. I'm a rabbi.
Right.
I
Well,
believe in that stuff, but at the same time, there's a disconnect for me here today in this conversation.
yeah, I don't have answer. I mean, I don't know the answer. If I knew that, I would be sitting somewhere else. Not that I'm saying that book, but I mean, I don't. I know for me, like if I just look at it myopically from my perspective, I would say there are some people I don't get along with, and for different reasons that may have to do with me, right, and how I interpret what they're doing. Um, Things I feel like are maybe that they're trying to do harm to me, and I may be misinterpreting it, but and I think that thinking scales up, right? And the imperfections in each one of us maybe are the things that keep us from being able to scale that idea.
All right. So what do you have a sense of what spiritual fulfillment feels like to you?
Uh, I don't know. I don't know what fulfillment. I mean, I'm not sure what fulfillment means. I mean, that's one of the problems with me. I rarely feel fulfilled. I'd say about at least as I see it, and when other people are telling me I should feel fulfilled, but I I don't. But that's also one of the things that drives me, maybe.
Well,
But
so you know
it's
what it doesn't feel like. So the opposite of that means that you must have an idea of what it feels like.
maybe. I mean, this might be what fulfillment feels like. If it is, I'm kind of disappointed. But
Yeah.
but I don't. I think I'm constantly moving and trying things because of where I'm at. I don't feel like this is where I want to stay,
Hmm.
right? Personally, not economically or any other way, but personally, I think the most fulfilling thing for me so far has been a father and a husband. I haven't always been great at either one of those, but I'm getting better. Certainly my career, we've talked about that has been mediocre in terms of fulfillment. Um, and what I think fulfills me, I kind of get there sometimes, and I find out that it didn't fulfill me, I think, or to the degree that I wanted to. So spiritual fulfillment, I'm certainly more spiritually fulfilled now than I was when I was 12 or 13, just because I didn't I took it for what it was worth, and I didn't question it. The things in that world were making me unhappy, and I didn't necessarily realize it. And I've gotten to a place where I'm more comfortable with my own opinion and perspective on it, right?
Hmm.
Um, I don't know that I can tell you what fulfillment for me looks like or feel complete fulfillment. I'm not unfulfilled. Glass is maybe half full, but the fulfillment glass is maybe half full. But I don't know that and I don't know that what is it? I don't know that I want to be completely fulfilled. If that might sound weird, but
No, but then what this feels like right now, if this is fulfillment, might not be so bad.
just disappointing. No,
Well, it could be disappointing at the same time if you're living a comfortably uncomfortable life on that realm.
Don't get me. I appreciate the life I have, right?
I didn't
And I
suggest
under,
otherwise.
and I understand the randomness of being where I'm at. Right. I think I forgot Warren Buffett put a letter out years ago about what's the probability that Warren Buffett was Warren Buffett, and it's extraordinary. And I think what's the probability that I'm me here is just as extraordinary in a different way. But I appreciate that I have the hand of cards I was dealt.
Do you have an idea of what a fulfilled community would look like?
I think I don't think it's we all get along because I think that's boring. Right. I think that discourse and I think one where disagreement doesn't escalate into something beyond conversation. People will be disappointed, and that's okay with outcomes, right? I think community consensus is important. I think it's fluid though, right? Social norms are fluid. Um, but I think one that has good discourse is able to adapt and minimizes, that when you're in the Lindsey Graham last night, uh, not getting or not Lindsey Graham. I forgot who. I think it was the governor or the senator from Pennsylvania. Said early on, I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't want him to be president, but I respect the process. And in a community, I think respecting the process that everyone's agreed. Now that process will change, but respecting that process is very important. Maybe one of the most important elements. And not there is the argument that he respected it too late or whatever, but respecting that process, being a purist, a centrist, I think is what helps make a community last longer.
So it's only if a community can, you and I have said in the past, innovation, the definition of innovation is coming up with new ways to do the same thing over and over again. And when people get stuck in that pattern, because communities naturally have to change and evolve and they don't want to. So there's the tension of those who are unwilling to evolve, those who don't realize that they need to evolve, and those who want to completely change it. And generation to generation tends to want to do that, right? Push up and change things. And without an effective pushback, then you get stuck. So I just said a bunch of different stuff there. But unless a community is willing to um, literally innovate, not in the way I just gave it, but to change because it needs to and be okay with that, which is frightening, you can't be fulfilled. That's what I just heard you say.
Well, innovation, you brought innovation into the
Yeah.
conversation. I get why you did, but that's not what I was saying, because uh, innovation is inevitable,
That's what I'm
right?
saying. So they need to accept it not as a way of doing the same thing over and over again. We don't do it that way, but that you naturally have to go with the flow that is going to change.
Yeah, I think that's a complication, right? Innovation is can be very unpleasant. It changes social norms quickly, right? And it'll only increase the rate of change and the ability for policy and other things to keep and communities to keep up with that change is going to become more difficult. So community means something different now, right? It used to mean geographic. Really, we had geographic bounds. But there's a new app that came out, or not, that's becoming popular, called Clubhouse, right? It's changing the way community is going to happen.
Hmm.
I was in it last night, and you're in there, and people create rooms for conversation, and there's somebody leading the room, whatever the dynamics are. Basically, you can create a community quickly of like-minded thinkers within minutes, right?
Yeah, but you
And
just said that's bad for community if you're all
I don't
like-minded thinkers.
I don't know. What I'm saying is what the definition of community, I think, is going, or at least the dynamics of community are changing rapidly. I saw something, within the last week that I think is going to be one of those things that changes it again quickly.
Hmm.
And it might not be that app, but it put out a framework that will be adopted, and it has good and bad implications.
One
But it
last
but
qu-
it changes community. It changes how community happens and where it happens.
Well, I think that, and look, I think it's really important that we're having this conversation the day after what happened in DC for whatever reason, because these issues are so hot and so important, so prescient, and so necessary. Um, uh, One last question for you: what's your community look like in 10 years?
I think it's, I think it's, I think it's more, and when for me and my wife, our community is going, I believe will be happening broadly. I think I see us being nomadic, and I don't see that as a result of economic privilege. I think more and more people will be nomadic. Um, and I see in my idealized vision of my future, I'm spending time, months, years, whatever, in different places. Um, and I think that's not going to be unique to us.
Good. Well, with that, I want to say I'm glad that you found Hakafa. Selfishly, I am. I really am, and I really treasure our time together. I treasure, if I may call it a friendship, our friendship, and spending quite a bit of time with you in a back and forth talking about this stuff, which gets us absolutely nowhere in lots of places at the exact same time. And I'm also glad that Hakafa got a chance to meet you as well. So
It,
thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I really enjoy the friendship, and it is a friendship, and I enjoy the conversation. I often think during the week, what are we going to talk about this week? I need to do some reading, and
It's never an issue. We always find something. And we always say we're going to get to a text, and we never get to the
yeah,
text.
right, right, right.
And that's
So I
because you're so darn Jewish. All right, Noel. Take care. Thanks a lot, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.